Independence is not an absolute concept. According to the Cambridge Dictionary, it is the ability to live your life without being helped or in being influenced by other people. In other words, you have to define independence in relation to being independent from something or from somebody. And this applies also to European audiovisual productions when it comes to defining what is an independent production. At the industry level, the European Audiovisual Observatory has done some research and we haven't found an agreed definition on independent producer, but in the statutes of many of the main European associations, we have found reference to an independent production. At EU level, the concept is used in many levels, mainly in the Creative Europe Media Sub-Program and in the Audiovisual Media Services Directive. But again, even if they refer to this concept, they don't define it. The only thing we have is Recital 71 of the AVMS Directive, which concerns producers who are independent from broadcasters. This is so far the only parameter that is concerning the independent producers. According to Recital 71, member states should take into account 3 criteria to assess the independence, and that is the ownership of the production company, the amount of programs that are supplied to the same broadcaster, and the ownership of secondary rights. The European Commission has also adopted guidelines, first in 1996, then in 2000, and lately in 2011. They are not mandatory, but they are certainly useful pinpoints for monitoring activity of the member states. Article 17 is the article to which this recital refers. And this has been implemented, of course, at national level. But very few countries have adopted a specific concept of independent production. A definition is very rare to find. The definition, though, is very important because it determines the subject of certain rights and support measures. If you think, for example, of Eurimage and the Fund for Co-production and Distribution of Cinematographic and Audiovisual Works, being an independent producer is a prerequisite to access the fund, and the same goes for certain measures at EU level. It is also true that in the regulatory mix that exists at European and national level for this kind of productions, it's important to identify who are the beneficiaries of certain measures. The regulatory mix I was referring to is made of various ingredients. I would say mainly 3 at the regulatory level. That is investment obligations, quota obligations, and direct or indirect contributions via film funds. I will briefly go through each of them. Financial investment obligations, they are a reality on broadcasters in most European countries. The obligation usually refers to European works created by independent producers, but it's also true that there is a variety of definitions out there. We have, for example, works by independent producers only or by national independent producers, European works and independent works, subcategories like cinematographic works or animated works for children's education or national original expression. There is really a wide variety. It's worth noting that in over half of the European countries the obligation is not mandatory but is optional. And this means that as an alternative to investment obligations, broadcasters can choose between the reserving the percentage of their transmission time to independent productions or paying a levy, that is an indirect contribution to the relevant film or audiovisual fund. In around half of these cases, there are then specific rules concerning public service broadcasters due to their specific role on the audiovisual market across Europe. So far for the broadcasters. When it comes to VOD providers, in around half of all cases there are rules concerning investment obligations, but they concern European works only and they are mostly not mandatory. There are some forerunners though. We have Spain, France, Greece, Italy, Portugal and Denmark from this year, where there have been introduced mandatory financial obligations on VOD providers. In Spain, France and Italy, these obligations also specifically include obligations on independent productions. Moving now on to the second tool, which are the quota obligations. These refer to the quota of 10% of the transmission time to be reserved to works made by independent producers. Quotas are introduced in the vast majority of EU member states, the exceptions being Germany, France and Italy, but where we have seen there are investment obligations. The wording of Article 17 has mostly been transposed literally. In some countries there are some stricter and more detailed rules. With regard to the third and last tool, national and regional film funds, they also provide support for works made by independent producers. In some countries like Denmark and Portugal, being independent is a requisite for receiving grants. The majority of film funds only require this qualification for certain schemes only, and this is often accompanied by the requirement of being established in that country. On top of this regulatory mix, there are also interprofessional agreements, which are a very interesting piece of measures. I would like to mention two examples. One is in France, where negotiations are currently ongoing concerning the broadcaster's share of in-house and independent production. Should the negotiations fail, there will be a suppletive decree determining the percentage of for the independent works. In Germany, there are special interprofessional negotiations and agreements concerning public service broadcasters. There is a framework agreement between the public service broadcasters ARD and ZDF and the audiovisual film and audiovisual producers, which lay down the basic conditions for drafting contracts for commission productions. And this is to weigh up for the position of very often weakness of the producers in the negotiations. I think I've talked enough. That should you wish more information, please take a look at our latest report. You will find it on the website of the European Audiovisual Observatory, free for download. Thank you very much.